Okay, we've got the CH16 back on the bench, checking it for leaks, and I only saw one leak, and I took the flywheel off camera, so a little bit right here. So you follow that up, you can see some of the shavings from when I was putting in those inserts. It didn't really hurt anything. The rear, or the front seal is doing real good. That's new, so that's good. But the one area that there is a leak is right here on this head bolt. So it's coming through the threads of that bolt. The one boss in here, where that head bolt is, you follow the line up right into there. The one boss for that, I saw the original bolts don't have a flange that's that large, and I liked the larger clamping flange of these aftermarket bolts that I put in. And they're a good heavy grade bolt, so you know they're good quality bolt, but I noticed that the contact pattern between, like if we're pretending that this boss is the same as this boss in here, or wherever that passage leads up into here, if we're pretending that it's about the same, the mating surface between the flange of the bolt and the casting, when it was torqued down from the factory, you could see where the original bolts had kind of chewed themselves into that boss. And I noticed when I put that one in that it wasn't going to have the same contact patch. It was going to leave a little bit of, there was like a little bit of a lip from where the flange would be pushing into the aluminum. And I didn't think too much about it, but I think what's happening is oil is sitting on top of the bolt and getting in through here and getting down into this cavity and coming down out of here. It's not a lot, but it's there. The other possibility is that the head gasket in here is not sealing completely around the threads, and it's coming through between the head gasket and the bolt. I'm not going to open it up because I don't want to loosen that bolt and then start the whole process over again. So I'm going to clean this up. I actually have a little bit of swarf from the aluminum that I want to clean up off the stator anyway. My concern was that the front main was leaking, but it's not. It's perfectly dry there. So you got a tiny little bit of goo right here. And yeah, I mean, it's not much, but over time, you know, that'll just collect dirt and it'll pack this whole area full of dirt and grass and stuff. So I think what I'm going to do is clean this off very thoroughly as a first step before we do anything else to the motor. I'm going to clean this very thoroughly, and with the engine sitting the way it is now, the oil's actually running away from that bolt head, so that's good. And then I'll get some good sealant around there and just seal off the bottom of that, those threads where they come down through the block right there. And then we'll go ahead and proceed with the rest of it. Everything else looks good. I didn't see evidence of that problem anywhere else, and I do remember there being a little bit of an inconsistency in the surface where that bolt came down through there. So we'll start cleaning this guy up and reassembling. Okay, so the flywheel is now back on, and there's a couple repairs I did off camera. That one leak we were talking about up in here, I have used some really good silicone sealant in there, and I'm going to let it cure for like a day. It is this Honda Bond HT stuff. If you haven't used this before, you need to. It is the most fantastic sealant ever. If you want to seal transmission pans, oil pans, anything that's exposed to oil continuously, it is the stuff to use. And this is the high temp stuff, so I basically just created a cavity in there to try to prevent any of the leaks coming out of the threads of the bolt. I cleaned up behind the flywheel and reinstalled the flywheel, torqued it down to 49 foot-pounds, dry. No lubrication there. The starter I was having issues with. You saw that on the video where I tested the ignition coil. And I took it apart and basically did a refresh on it. So I rebuilt the... I basically lubricated the ratcheting mechanism and all of the bushings on this end and on the opposite end over there. Cleaned out everything inside, the commutator, brushes, everything. Put it back together and tested it, and it looks to be doing fine. So that took a while. I had some springs flying across the shop. It was not fun times for a minute. I even brought another starter out of my pile in case I needed to rob a spring. I basically just had to walk away, and then I came back and found the spring on the floor. So I never like taking starters apart. That's just what happens. So where we're at now is we're finally back on the reassembly process. Fixed the tiny oil leak. Took the wiring that goes out to the ignition coil and tied it in here, cleaned up all the wiring that was here. I see no sense for having two sets of connectors, so I just integrated the ignition coil plug into the harness and eliminated the fuel solenoid wire because the fuel solenoid wire that is here I have unhooked. I'm not going to be using it. So one wire less coming out this way. What else? Oh, cleaned up the wiring in here where the diodes were. Put a new connector in there. Ran some heat shrink down it all the way out to here. And the thought is, instead of one of the things I really don't like on the horizontal command singles is that they run this wiring right along the block, and they run it right around here. And there's some shrouding that's not on there now, but basically they run this whole section of harness here all the way down around the fins, and then they kind of shove it in between. Like there's a shroud that comes over like right here and basically just squishes this wiring into the block. So instead of doing that, there's now where the Spark Advance module used to sit, there's basically a hole right here. I've put in a grommet. It's actually made for a thinner material than this is, so you can see it's a little distorted, but it'll work. I'm going to run this wiring out through that hole and then hook it back up to the connector and attach this connector back to the shroud. So really, there's no reason to not do it like that. I don't see why they ran it that close to the heat. I don't see why they ran it that close to the block. And it will make things easier in the long run. So I did add in a ground wire here for the ignition module. So we've got, looks like we've got a good spot right here to put a bolt and put in a ground. So that may run there. I'm not sure yet. I just left it long. So it's cleaned up, nice and tight. It's not going anywhere. Yeah, that's where we're at. I'm going to call it a night and let the RTV cure, and then we'll come back tomorrow and start putting the shrouds on and doing the final wiring. Okay, so the ignition module is on, and the flywheel is back on, and I've repaired that leak that was coming out of that hole right there where those threads were. And then cleaned up everything behind the shroud, or behind the flywheel. It's been setting for a couple days. So the sealant has had a chance to cure and do its thing. No issues there. I've integrated the connector into the harness. Just put some sealed butt connectors there. And then heat shrinked all the wiring. And I'm going to run the wiring, instead of running it out the hole in the shroud, I'm going to run it down lower than it came from the factory and come through this way and out. And I'll show you why. I'm going to do that. It's one of the areas of the Kohler that on this single cylinder command that I do not like. They used to run the wiring right through here and shoved it into the fins with the shrouds, so I'm not going to do that. So it's ready to start having the shrouds put back on, and then we can put it in the frame and give it a good test run. So it's a balmy 30 degrees. We'll make it work. I think the first step is going to be to just put the main front shroud on, and I think we're ready to go. This is all nice and tight. Yeah, let's go ahead and put that on. I'll get a block of wood to lift this up off of the table a little bit. Okay, so here's the original hole in the shroud where the wiring used to go through for the ignition module that was on the outside of the shroud. I'm going to plug that hole so we don't get air shooting out there with some sort of grommet. And yeah, I've got like an assortment grommet set. This one's kind of like a blanking plug, more or less. There's no hole in the middle of it. So we're going to try to get this to go in the hole. It's not quite the right size, so it's going to fight me a little bit, but it's alright. If it was easy and fun, everybody would do it, right? Alright, it's in there. Kind of. Oh no, just popped out. The thickness of the shroud is more than the grommet wants to accommodate for, so it's going to be a little funky in there, but it'll work. So on the back side, there's that grommet right there. So just enough to cover the hole. So now that's in place, let's set this on here. I gotta get that in place too. So it takes a little bit of wiggling and finagling to get this on with this this shroud here is already connected, so it's going to make it a little funky, but we'll get it. Over that edge and there. So this shroud goes behind this one, and then come over here and goes around that one. And off camera I did put that shroud on. That wasn't on in the last video, but that one's pretty simple. There's not much to it. So it goes through here, and yeah, we're pretty there. Okay, it's got to pop right on the other side of that plate. So spark plug wires in there. Oh, I forgot the clip. There's a couple of these clips that are supposed to be fastened to the shrouds before you get things in place, because they go on the back side of the shrouds. That's one of them. It's kind of a pain. Alright, come on. Pop over the edge. Here. It's over the edge. Wiring's nice and loose over there. I'm going to throw a bolt in that top bracket because I don't want that clip to fall out of there. These have been pulled off and put on so many times that they're just not, you know, this stuff is not meant to be taken on and off all the time like I've been doing with it, so. Alright, look pretty good there. Yeah. And hold this one down so it doesn't fall out of there. Okay. So we got a 10 mil there. This 10 mil is already put in, and then we've got another, another small 10 mil there. one there. Got. And then I think those are the three big ones. You've got this one here for the dipstick tube. Now, this is a different size. This thread was completely chewed, and I had to rethread that one with a larger bolt, just like I did some of the others. So yours won't look exactly like that. And then the shroud's got a couple. So there's one here and one on the opposite side over here, right under the voltage regulator. And these are the primary reason that this, well, they're not the primary reason, but they're one of the reasons that you'd want to take this out of the frame to get to it, because you just can't get to some of these shroud bolts the way it is. Okay, looks good there. Get everything started. Everything's pretty happy. Nothing too crazy there. And then I'm gonna put this connector right here. It was up here. I'm gonna put it right here for now. And maybe just hold it with one bolt. I don't know. I think, yeah, I need a smaller. I don't know if I want a bolt that's long enough to go. This one here I think I'm missing. I don't want to, yeah, because the flywheel is right behind. Yeah, the flywheel is right behind that. I don't want to put a long bolt in that hole and hit the ring gear on the flywheel. So I have to find a smaller one for that. Was there not one in there before? I wonder what happened to it. I don't have any smaller ones. I know that one's not. What's this here? I don't have a lot of metric stuff in the shop either, since I primarily work on the small engine stuff. Oop, that's probably one right there. Yeah, that's too long. Oh, what happened to it? Yeah, I even have the washer for it. Yeah, I even have the washer. The washer's right there. What happened to the bolt? Okay, I'll be back. I'm gonna find a bolt that'll fit that. Okay, we found a bolt for this guy here. It's doesn't match any of the other ones on the engine, so I don't like that, but it does work, and it's short enough that it's not gonna hit the flywheel ring gear. So let's finish up the shroud, and then we'll hook up this connector and hook up the ground for the ignition coil. So you got some 8s. Oh, that's just an Allen wrench now. That one. Those, and we'll tighten this one up. Okay, and then we've got this one and that one there. And those are 10s. Okay. Let's go over here. This guy's already tight. Should be. Yep. Alright, now we'll get that connector secured. And these little guys right here, those are 7s. They might even be a standard instead of a metric, I don't know for sure. Now, will my connector fit with it sitting like that? Looks like it probably will. I can adjust that later if I need to. Okay. So that's in there, that's nice and secure. The wiring here is not pinched at all. So the wiring comes back through this area of the shroud. And I get a flashlight. You can see there's plenty of room now for that wiring to pass between the shroud and the engine. It was up in here, and they kind of just shoved it in between the fins and the shroud, so that's a little better. There's more room down in the block right there. Next is, I'm going to run a ground right here. This is the bolt that was supplied with the ignition module kit. Just happened to find a place to hook it up over here that was not being used for anything. So tighten that up. We'll tighten that up because that was just loosely sitting there. And then the shrouding's done. And then we'll move over here, hook up the voltage regulator. So I've got the wire clipped. I've got the connector ready to install here. I'm going to use a sealed heat shrink connector. That's what I've used on everything else too. So one of those guys. Okay, it's crimped. Heat it up. Should be good. And then hook her up to ground over here. I want that to run probably like that. Maybe like that. Yeah. Alright. Sorry my hands are in the way. I'm just trying to keep my whole body out of the camera. Okay, so wiring is done. Let's oh, the starter's already been hooked up, but we can move that around a little bit, I think. Move it down behind here. A little cleaner. Yeah, that'd be a little cleaner like that. There's our starter wire, ground connector there. Hopefully I can slide the other connector in right here. There's a little bit of a face here that might interfere. If so, I'll just either rotate the connector a little bit and just have it held on by one screw, or I might move it up to one slot up here. There's 4 holes in this shroud. I think the 15 horse doesn't have the ignition module, and so the wiring's different. And I think the and maybe even the 12 and 13 horse have these holes here where the connector goes. So the 16 is kind of an oddball. It has different wiring, different ignition system. Let's put it down. There we go. Rotate it around. Okay. So now we're going for the voltage regulator. So you've got a ground. I've replaced this ground, made it a little more robust than the original. And the ground just hooks to one of these lugs here. I think I had it hooked to the bottom lug before. Come down here, this guy. Careful that you don't over tighten these, because they're just going through, all they're grabbing is a little bit of that plastic in the shroud, and they are not going to be happy with being over torqued. You've got your stator wires on the outside and the power wire there. This is the low fuel pressure indicator. I was going to take out the drain and reseal the threads on it, but it's really not leaking, so I think I'm just going to leave it alone. Before we put it back in, get this guy put in. Got a new one of these air ducts here. The other one was just so chewed up, it was not even funny. It wouldn't fit at all. Kind of a funky setup, but they eventually, play with it a little bit to get it to fit. Here. It's in there. There. All right. So now that's in there. Yep. Really, like, it needs a notch right here in order to fit right. But that's in there now. What else we have? I think that's it. I think we're ready to put it back on the tractor. So I'm going to get you set up, and we're going to heave and hoe and get this thing back in the frame.